Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to the Community Express show with myself, your host, Wajid Hussain, and we have Andy the Sage in the studio, Andy the Philosopher, and a man of many names. Welcome to Nova Radio Northeast, and thank you for being here. Andy, I just want to begin because you said you've got many names. Tell us a little bit, introduce yourself to our audience.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of planet Earth. I'm Merlin, the old man who grows younger. This is the first of many names, after Andy. Merlin, you know who he is. He's the wizard who put King Arthur on the throne. But one of the stories told about Merlin was that he was an old man, born in the future, who grew older, going backwards through time. That in his life, well, it wasn't his life, he was many men, many women, many transgender, many boys, girls, people. A person who turned up with something to say, an idea, an inspiration that changed what was going on. I'm Merlin, the old man who grows younger. That's a performing name for me. I'm Socrates, reborn, looking for my Platos. Socrates and Plato, two of the greatest philosophers of all time. Plato is the student who surpassed his mentor. Well, I'm looking for the people who are going to surpass me. Isaac Newton gave a great quote when he was called a genius. He replied, "Sir, I'm not a genius. I'm a dwarf who climbs on the shoulders of giants." Well, who I am as a philosopher, who I am as a person, is accumulation of all of the people who've made me. And as Plato surpassed Socrates, I'm looking for the people who are going to surpass me. A third name I wanted to give you is La Lingua de Northumbria. This is Italian. Its lingua means language and it means tongue. I'm an oral tradition philosopher. I'm a storyteller, and I'm from Northumbria, the ancient kingdom of Northumbria.
And that's where you were born?
Yes.
Yeah?
I was born at Hexham General Hospital.
Hexham General Hospital. Right in the middle is sort of in the as the breadth of it goes. Yes.
Yes.
Okay, very nice. And it's beautiful out there.
Oh, it's absolutely stunning.
Yeah, I think it's a childhood that it's out in the countryside, out exploring, out being part of nature. It must have been something else.
I grew up on a farm in the middle of nowhere, just outside Kirkwalpington. It's a little village midway between Ponteal and Otterburn. Because even though many of the audience listening, you're from this part of the world, you might never have heard of Kirkwalpington. I was born just as the sun rose. I grew up in the British countryside, right on the edge where you've got moors to the north and you've got the rolling British countryside to the south. I had a very blessed childhood on one hand. There is a darker side. I got very ill when I was a baby.
Right.
I spent between 18 months and 2 years old in the RVI here in Newcastle, for most of it, stretched out in a hospital bed in traction.
Right.
The NHS, and I would just like to take a moment just to say thank you to all the doctors, the nurses, the cleaners, the porters, everybody who's been involved in the NHS. They saved my life when I was a baby. They've affected the lives of all of us.
Yeah, and not just saving the life, but the quality of life you get from the people who do this great work. I think they're unsung heroes in so many ways, and I think sometimes even taken for granted.
Yes.
You know, we don't really appreciate the value they bring and the quality they put in, the effort and the quality their own pride of work, as it were. Do you know what I mean?
This is one of the things that upsets me with what's going on politically in the country, is that I don't think our political class really respect the NHS. They don't empower the doctors and nurses to do what they need to do to look after us. And I think this is a big issue, and it's something we need to challenge.
Yeah, I mean, just to explore that a little bit. So, as you sort of grew up in Northumberland, you must have had plenty of moments to go off and ponder, reflect upon things, and give things consideration. Because I suppose that's the beauty of being out there, isn't it?
Well, it's part of that, and it's part of my story. I consider myself a cripple, and I'm aware that's a shocking word. I've got serious problems with my legs. This has meant I've had a lot of time where I've been unable to walk. where I've sat in my own mind exploring, but more than just that, I went to Belsay First School. To anybody who knows it, the school's up on the top of a hill, and you go down on the playing field and there's trees at the bottom. I remember many times running out, following my friends, and they would run down the field and down the hill, across the field, and run up the trees. I would run after them, not quite as quickly, but as I was running, I would figure out which tree I wanted to climb, how I'd get up it, and how I'd get back down it. Some things some of my friends didn't do.
An exit strategy, how am I going back down from it? Well, I suppose because you had to think about things differently, didn't you? Because you had that, I suppose, that physical awareness of capability, and you were just keeping that in mind.
Yeah. Well, I think with my health problems, they're both a curse and a blessing. I wouldn't be the person who I am if I hadn't suffered as much as a child. And this is one of the things I think when it comes to disability. When I mentioned the word cripple, and I'll say it again, I'm a cripple. This shapes the way that I deal with the world. It's made me pay far more attention. And the reality is, for a lot of disabled people, we're highly intelligent people. We've got to be able to figure out how to live our lives. And this is also why I love the North East. As Geordies, as Northumbrians, we're the people who actually built the 21st century. The first electrically lit building on the planet was Cragside. The Armstrong family. The first publicly lit electric building was here in Newcastle, and it was the Litchfield Society, which I just want to give that building another plug, about what it is about this part of the world that I love. It was the first public library that we are aware of on the planet that was open for any man, woman or child to go in, take a book out, sit down and read. It didn't matter your class, it didn't matter your skin colour, your race, your religion. If you went in there, you took a book out and you sat down and you quietly started to read, they would let you. I think this is an incredibly important part about this country, this city, this part of the world. What it means to be English, what it means to be British, what it means to be Northumbrian.
Yeah, and again, the Lytton Fill, it actually sits along the line of the Hadrian Wall, doesn't it?
Yes.
It actually sits on that stretch of walk.
We think so.
Whichever, yeah.
But we're not actually sure where the Roman Wall went through Newcastle. I'm a stickler for some of the details on this. But if you go into the Litchfield, they take you into the members only library. They can show you at the bottom some stones, and they say that those were foundation stones of the Roman Wall. And the guy who showed me that, Chris, so when he said it was with a wink, it's like, we think that's the foundation.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Because
yeah.
it's this little bit of honesty which makes the facts so more important, I think.
Well, yeah, I think it is. I mean, imagine like 1,000 years from now, they dig up one of these tips and they find all this plastics and toys and all the rest of it. How would they interpret that? You know what I mean? 1,000 years from now. And I suppose we do the same, don't we? We see these bits of pottery, or we see these buildings and these stones, and we interpret them, but very much from our view of today. And you're right, they're not 100% fact. It's kind of a conjecture, a bit of educated guessing, of course, but just awareness. But again, you don't really know, do you?
This, for me, it's why I am an oral tradition philosopher. You're never going to write any books that I read. And there's some deep, profound points on this. One of the things is, when we write things down, particularly when we print it out, people have a habit of thinking that that's true. Well, you can pick up a copy of Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter. Do you necessarily think they're true? If you pick up a Stephen Hawking's Brief History of Time, do you think that's true? It's one of the beauties about the spoken word, is that we can say something is true and we can make a mistake. Just a plain misspeak. For me, as a storyteller, as an oral tradition philosopher, I'm a storyteller. That's the honest truth. I tell some lies. I tell a lot of truth. And some of the most true statements I say are false. They're lies. This fascinates me. It's very curious.
I think it is. I mean, have you read A Brave New World by Aldous Huxley?
I've not read it.
Oh, you've got to read it. Read it and then all right, okay. So, because it's about, there's a savage in the story, but it's wonderful how he builds this world of where people are kind of genetically created to do jobs, and there's reservations where they keep so-called savages, and they find this person, and he's referring to the book, and the book is actually a collection of Shakespeare's works.
Yes.
That's what he refers back to, and that's where he gets his guidance from, and that's where he gets his knowledge from. And I suppose it's that idea that this is the only thing that survived, and this kid, when he was a kid, he learned to read. But as he moves into the so-called civilized world, he realizes there's so many contradictions, and this isn't civilized. This is savagery. So the savage is now telling the civil people that they're savage, and the civilized people are sort of seeing his civilization, or his civility, as it were. But I'm gonna have to challenge you on the reading thing, because I love reading, and I love a nice creative book. Like I said, Aldous Huxley sets things off in my mind. Terry Pratchett, loved his stuff. James Herbert gave me nightmares. Nightmares, honestly. But I couldn't stop reading. That's the thing, I couldn't stop reading. And I think there's something very powerful in a story, whether it's spoken or written. Because I listen to a lot of Audible books simply because it saves me a lot of time. But in the sense of, it still creates your own kind of space where you can...
On this, I think reading is incredibly important. I'm dyslexic. When I was 11 years old, I had the reading and writing age of a 3-year-old.
Right. So when you were how old?
11.
When you were 11, wow.
The third book that I read, which was about 7 or 8 weeks after I got diagnosed, was the Bible.
Okay.
I've read thousands of books, a lot of them science fiction and fantasy. Brave New World is just one of the classics that I haven't got to because I was reading everything else. I think reading is incredibly important. The statement about I'm not going to write any books is a personal one. If you want to hear my thoughts as a philosopher, listen to me speak.
Well, come and see you, innit? That's of course. I'm just saying, because I only happened to come across that book because a sibling of mine had to do a book review, and I go, "Wajid, you like to read, don't you? Give that a go. Tell us what you think." And once you get past the first 2 chapters, because that's the technical bit, it's a great story. But yes, you're right. It's reading's not for everyone, but it's the element of how you absorb information, how you can take that in.
This takes me on to sort of the big area of my philosophy, and where I talk and think about what's happening to us as a species. There's been 2 great things that have separated us from the animal kingdom. There's many, many different things, but there's 2 in specific. One is what we are doing now, which is we're speaking to each other.
Communicate, yeah.
And the second is writing. Writing has been a fantastic development tool for us as a species. I can talk for hours on this. I'm limiting myself at the moment. And there's a third one which I think is really important. And this is a word which I've created. It's technopathy. It's like telepathy, the mystical power of mind reading, except it's actually real. Me and Wajid have been talking to each other through WhatsApp and through instant messenger and things like this. This is a third form of communication. It's like talking, it's like reading, and it's like telepathy. I think this is an evolutionary step for us as a species.
I'm just sorry if I just, because it's the idea, like how the Google glasses. You could send me a message and I could see it in my screen of my eye, as it were. But you're right. It's wow, what a great thought.
Well, just to expand on this, this is a little bit of my philosophy, and I love this.
Go for it.
It's a profound statement as well about us as a species. We are no longer Homo sapiens. We aren't the apes who tell stories anymore. It's not about the indigo children. It's not about Homo superior, and it's not about the X-Men. The indigo children, as far as I'm concerned, Google them, look up what it is if you don't know. These are children who've been spoiled by their parents because their parents haven't raised them. Homo superior is this elitist notion that some human beings are better than others. And, well, the X-Men, it's a movie, it's a comic book series. My name for us as a new species is Homo technogenus. We're the primates who use technology. We can flick fire from our fingers, we flick on light with a switch, we step into a metal tube and step out of it on the other side of the planet hours later, and we have this technopathy. We have the ability to talk with people around the world who aren't in the room with us using technology. It changes us profoundly as a species. And from this, I want to go into politics and things like this.
But just before we get into that, Andy, I think the way you've worded that, it kind of reshapes thinking. Because I think, like how we talk about, people talk about millennials, that they don't know what the world was like before the internet.
Yes.
Like they've all been brought up with the internet, so they can't imagine it without the internet. And I suppose we grew up with certain technologies that we couldn't imagine what the world was like without it. And as you go back and back and back, but I think there's something you said around sort of the indigo children thing. How do you reconcile being truly appreciative and grateful for having this ability to do this, but then also kind of exploring yourself and where you sit in the world, stand in the world, represent in the world?
There's a couple of ways that I can come into this. One is, there was a past, it happened. There will be a future, it's what comes next. To take this on, well, I've got a left foot and a right foot. When I want to go for a walk, I move one in front of the other and then the other in front of that. That we learn from the past. As a species, we've been doing this for thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of years. There is a complete change going on at the moment. The technogenesis thing, I want to talk about this in detail to big audiences repeatedly around the planet. But we've got to learn from the old past, from the traditions. The multi-generational institutions like our religions, like our governments, like our cultures, our nationalities, what our parents tell us, and grandparents, common sense. This is accumulated wisdom which has come through for thousands of years, and we're passing it on. When I call myself Socrates reborn, looking for my Platos, this to me strikes right into the heart of this, that we are going through this transition phase. We need new voices that are going to speak up and talk about what it is to be alive now in the 21st century. The last great social movement that happened on the planet was during the sort of started in the 1950s, went through the 1960s and into the 1970s. It's the Beat Generation, it's the counterculture revolution, it's the hippies. I call us, those born after about 1967, 1970, the hipsters. Were the people who came out after the hippies. And there's a personal joke in this for me. My health problems, the reason why I was in a hospital bed when I was a baby was because of an infection in my left hip. Okay. I had a full hip replacement when I was 28 years old.
Wow.
I was the youngest person in the UK, as far as I'm aware, to have a hip replacement that wasn't because of an accident or an illness, as it had been destroyed. And every person on the planet who's had a hip replacement in the last 40 years owes a debt of thanks to a little baby who was stretched out in a hospital bed. The changes which have happened over the last half century, the message which has come through for the hipsters, we've heard it all before. All of our music, all of our TV shows, all of our movies, all of our books, all of our school teachers, university lecturers have been repeating the same messages for the last 50 years. And with all due respect, they don't seem to quite understand how profoundly the world has changed and what it means to be a young person now, the millennials, the Generation K, I think it's the term.
Is that what they're calling them now? Okay.
The Generation K are the people who are coming after the millennials.
Is it? All right, okay.
I think.
You're more in tune than I am,
yeah,
Andy.
well,
okay.
This is what I study. But it's not about throwing out the baby with the bathwater. It's not about rejecting all of the wisdom from the past. It's understanding what from the past is important and understanding how we can adapt this into a future which is vastly different to anything that's ever happened before on the planet. And we need new voices on this, and I would like to be one of the ones that gets heard.
The one that gets started. All right. Okay, so what we'll do is I'm going to put on Of Wolf and Man for you. Is that all right?
Yes.
This is another selection from our guest, Andy. And so Metallica, Of Wolf and Man. You're listening to Nova Radio Northeast here on the Community Express Show, and we'll be with you in just a moment.
Yeah, I'd rather be a lover than a fighter. Cause all my life I've been fighting. Never felt a feeling of comfort. All this time I've been lying, and I never had someone to come on. Nah, I'm so used to shit. Love only left me alone, but I'm at one with the silence. I found peace in your vibes. Can't show me there's no point in trying. I'm at one, and I've been quiet for too long. I found peace in your vibes. Can't show me there's no point in trying. I'm at one, and I've been silent for too long. I've been quiet for too long. I've been quiet for too long. I found peace in your vibes. Can't show me there's no point in trying. I'm at one, and I've been quiet for too long. I'm in need of a savior, but I'm not asking for favors. My whole life I felt like a burden.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to Nova Radio Northeast here on the Community Express show with myself, your host, Wajid Hussain, and our special guest, Andy.
Hello.
Hello, Andy. Just before the break, we were talking all sorts of musings. My gosh, where did we get to? We just
redefining the species.
Yeah, that's where we were. Yeah. So now that we've done that, it only takes 20 minutes. We were talking and exploring around the shifts in not just sort of the technological shifts and the ideas of stories, storytelling, and how we sort of ingrain information within ourselves. Let's carry on, Andy.
Yes.
I do apologize to our listeners and Andy and to Metallica for introducing that song that wasn't obviously Metallica. I thought I dropped it in the system and it wasn't. I ended up with Silence feat. Khalid, a song called Marshmallow. Maybe some other time.
Yeah.
I do apologize. But yes, so Andy, let's just pick up where we left off, because we were kind of heading towards, we were talking about thought and
yes.
thinking and those sort of things.
Well, with that, for me, when I give this, and I've given this talk many times around the planet in various different ways, it to me comes down to something very real and very practical. The big ideas are lovely, but we've got to deal with living in the 21st century. And to be quite quick about this, in order to sort out what's going on the planet, we've got to replace our economic system. That's the short and tall of it. In order to replace our political, economic systems, and I've got ideas for this, we can talk about that another time, we've got to replace our political systems. Our current political systems, they're fundamentally unfit for purpose. What's happening now in Westminster is, I'm not allowed to swear. That's how ridiculous it is. I can't use non-swear words. But it's not about having a revolution. It's not about blood and fire in the streets. It's not about our friends, loved ones, strangers being locked up, maimed or killed. It's not about fleeing for our lives, which is what a revolution would create. What we need is a social evolution.
Yeah, and we've seen that, recently in our own times. Seen what's happening in Syria,
yes.
in Libya, Iraq, all of these places, and it hasn't worked out. Egypt, even.
Yes. Well, revolutions have a terrible history. There's only one revolution which has been really that successful, and that was the American Revolution, when they declared independence from us. And they started the American experiment, and there's some serious problems going on there at the moment as well.
There was a whole indigenous population that received the brunt of the American Revolution. Really,
there's a huge amount going for that, but I'm really concerned about what's going on now. To replace our political systems, we need a new idea, and on this I've got one. And I don't care if Wajid tries to stop me. I'm going to tell you.
I'm listening. Go for it.
I call it participatory democracy. Is my idea for replacing our current types of democracy, and it's to do with this technopathy. It's to do with the fact we can communicate with each other. The simple reality is, to organise a civilization, a nation, a planet, a group of people, whatever, we need to have some form of government. That's a reality. The historical reality of this was you had to get a group of people in the same room at the same time to talk to each other, and this is what they did. They stayed in the same room or a bunch of rooms and talked to each other the entire time. And they became disconnected from the outside world. This is abundantly obvious now. My idea of participatory democracy is turning it on its head. As an introduction, if you want to come along and get involved, come along and get involved. You get the vote. If you're not interested, get on with your life. If you become interested, if you think what's going on is wrong, well, it's very simple. Come along and get involved.
Get involved.
Yeah.
Okay.
What I mean by this is, I think one day a week, and I say a Wednesday, and hundreds of thousands, millions of people have heard me say this, a Wednesday. Those of us who are interested, we meet together. We can meet together in schools and churches, in temples and mosques, in cafes, on the beach, in hills, anywhere where a group of people can get together and talk to each other and listen to each other and discuss what matters. Now, I need to put a little bit of a sidebar in on this. There's a group of people on the planet who are causing all of the problems, and you might think you know who they are. And I'm not going to list the conspiracy names because I can't be bothered. Who these people are, they're the people who shout about the world and how it is and how it should be, according to their belief. And I do a visible representation of this, and it's my thumbnail. Then there's a group of people who listen to these and they don't all agree with each other. They're all shouting their different bits and pieces. Who listen to some of these and they shout backwards and forwards, and I represent this with my thumb. And they're people who are listening and shouting back. They're basically saying, "You're wrong. Everybody else is right. We're right. Everybody else is wrong."
Yeah.
Then everybody else, we just want these people to shut up. On the Wednesday during the day, we gather together. We talk with each other. Those people, if we've got to lock them in a room with each other to talk, shout at each other, we do that. We talk in groups on the Wednesday. In the evening, we get together and we vote on the big issues. I think for most of us, one day a week is enough. Then there's the people who say it's not enough for us. These become the new political class. On the Thursday, they're meeting together in the regional area. On the Friday, they're meeting together in the larger regional area. On the Saturday and Sunday, they're meeting together according to nationality, but not just nationality, according to their religious beliefs, according to their sporting interests, according to their music taste, whatever. On the Monday, they're meeting together to discuss what the global agenda is and what the issue is for going to be talked about on the Wednesday. On the Tuesday, they have a day off because even people who just talk to each other need a time off to rest. And then we're back into the Wednesday. And I've got a large talk to give about this, trying to cut it down into just a couple of minutes. Makes it a little bit fluffy.
Might not quite be given it the justice that it needs.
Yeah.
No, I fully appreciate that.
But this is, as far as I'm concerned, what we really need is a social evolution.
So this is what you're talking about when you talk about participatory
Yes.
democracy. All right.
Yeah, if you want to come along and get involved, you come along and get involved. It's that simple. And because of the internet, because of technopathy, we can have big debates about this. And it's not about having one person who's got the idea. It's not about having some great leader who will motivate us all. It's about us working together, bringing back the idea with Newcastle, with us as Geordies or as Northumbrians. We built this city together. We here changed the world. The first electrically lit building, the steam train, the steam turbine bridge for the Turbinia. Go to the Discovery Museum, they'll tell you about it. These inventions changed the world, and they weren't about one person with a great idea. They were about people who said, let's work together and figure this out. This is where I think we need to be going, and this is what our technology allows us to do.
But could you not say that it's kind of happening at the moment? Does it need more direction? Like, you look at all social media platforms, something happens and there's sparks of activity and things get a little bit interesting sometimes. But it's kind of happening there. How would you look at, probably for lack of a better word, Andy, but how would you reshape that to sort of have this element of participatory democracy?
My feeling with the internet is that it's a huge amount of people shouting backwards and forwards at each other, and there's very little listening that's going on. The whole fake news, faux news, it's not just coming out from Trump and from the alt-right and Steve Bannon and idiots like that. I think there's a big problem that's coming out from the left, the liberals, the progressives, and it's this shouting backwards and forwards that you're wrong, we're right, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. The internet has become too much about this at the moment. But this is just a new technology. What we actually need to do is start having a clearer conversation. And this is where I think meeting together, where we talk.
So you're talking about meeting face to face then?
Yes.
Right.
And I'm aware that we can use the internet to get groups of people who don't want to meet each other face to face on the Wednesday, and that they can have their communities. But I think being able to talk in our communities and live our lives our way, this is taking me into social things on this. I'm opposed to multiculturalism. I think that multiculturalism is a bust because it's become a culture in its own right that is now in conflict with every other culture. My alternative to this, my next step, the new idea, I call it panculturalism. Just to give some metaphors to bring this into context, when multiculturalism was first being talked about, they talked about a banquet table where you could have Thai food and French food and British food and etc. on the table, and you could go and pick some bits and pieces. During the 60s and 70s, this became the melting pot, the idea that we could blend all of these cultures together. Now in the 21st century, how I think of it is that they've taken the banquet table, they've put it into a blender and they've given you a smoothie and said, drink. And anybody who goes, I don't want to drink that, it's racist, it's bigot, it's fascist. My idea of panculturalism is we go back to the banquet table, the idea of having different, distinct cultures and communities and societies. And what we're looking to build is a patchwork quilt, where we allow different communities to be different, the heavy metal community to be different to people who like jazz music or classical music or no music, to the people who want to be artists, to the people who want to be Muslims or Christians or Hindus or Buddhists or atheists, that we can separate out into our separate communities and live our way where we are. That then have these communities talking to each other as neighbours. This partying thing when we get to share our time, this tourism thing when we go to see different parts of the world, it's really nice when you go travelling and you go into a different culture and it's shocking and surprising. It's a bit sad if you go there and it's just like home. Well, it's not that different. It's just a bit sunnier or it's a bit colder. As a species, I think our diversity is one of our great strengths. We don't all want to be the same. And if I'm sounding like I'm a bit confused or mentioning many things here, it's because I've got hundreds of hours of material to say on this, which is all jumbling through my mind at the moment.
Just to so what's the difference? What does pan mean when you say pan multiculturalism?
It's about respecting our different cultures. I've got a creed which I'll mention later. One of the statements in there is be respectful. I'll explore this a little bit now. The first thing about be respectful is, it's really important, learn to respect yourself. Respect your ego. We do have a self. This is a deep philosophical question. And some people say, oh, we don't. Whether you want to say self or you want to say spirit or you want to say soul, that depends on whether you're a spiritual person or a religious person. But respect this. And then it's not about respect me. It's not about respect my culture. And not about making us, the multicultural, be everybody. It's about respecting, no, we're different. Respect other people's cultures. Respect other people's religions, respect other people's nationalities, respect other people's sexualities, respect other people's gender, other people's music taste, other people's clothing styles, etc., etc., etc. And the idea of panculturalism, rather than us all becoming one and becoming the same, it's recognizing the diversity of us.
So it's, like you said, it's respecting the diversity of it. However, there is a lot of big push on, when you look at the Brexit, it's kind of a push on that though, isn't it? It's sort of saying there's too much culture, there's too much diversity, and they kind of want to trim it down, as it were.
I think to talk about Brexit, first of all, we've got to acknowledge the people like Tommy Robinson, the people like, I've forgotten the names of the groups, and there are some people here who are deeply scary people, who preach hatred, who preach intolerance. I have no interest in denying these people exist, but they're a tiny minority. They're not even really a fringe, they're just a bit of a tassel. But for those huge number of people, they see the world changing around them very quickly. They find that they get challenged because they stand up and say they're proud to be English or British, that they are happy being from a small group, and this causes some problems. One of my awakening moments, I was on a march, this is back about 2008 here in Newcastle. We were marching against, I think it was the EDL at the time, and there was half a dozen of them. There was about 2,000-3,000 of us, the anti-fascists, the good people. And we went from the centre of life round by Central Station and then up to Monument and up Northumberland Street to Haymarket on this march. And I was watching, it was like something out of George Orwell's 1984. There was half a dozen of them. It was just a handful. And what they were saying was, we're British, we're English, we're proud, this is our country. There was 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 of us going, you're racists, you're fascists. And I looked around at Newcastle. This is a beautiful city. You see every skin colour here, you see every religion, every race. You can hear any language spoken on the streets. The people of Newcastle were all looking away. They weren't joining us who were shouting against the fascists. And it was like waking up in George Orwell's 1984 to the 2 Minutes of Hate. I left the march, I went round through some of the pubs in Newcastle and was just listening to the conversations in the pub where the ordinary people were speaking. And they were talking about, we saw the 24 skinheads at the time they were skinheads. Then there's these 2,000-3,000 people who are just shouting everybody was fascist. And they're going, I'm English, I'm a Geordie, I'm British, I'm proud of that. This doesn't make us into a racist or a fascist. I think the whole Brexit thing, a lot of it was a backlash against this multicultural push. This idea that we should all be the same. We are all one species. Our skin colour does not change us into a different type of human being. Neither does our religion, neither does our sexuality or our nationality. But these are actual, real and important differences between us. To be a Christian or to be a Muslim or to be a Hindu or a Buddhist is really important. Just a little bit more about me. Yes, I am from the northeast of England, but I've travelled around the world. I've just come back from 2 years living in Thailand. It's a beautiful country, beautiful people, very, very different culture, very different way of life. And it's a plug. Please, if you want to go somewhere special on the planet, go to Thailand. Just when you're there, remember, be respectful. It is a really welcoming country, but they're very, very different to us.
But then I suppose, because you see, one of the reasons why people feel that multiculturalism has failed is because they feel certain cultures are given priorities over others. That's the sort of the main gist of it. That lot get this much and we're only getting this much, and because the pie is only this big, there's not enough to go around, and why should that lot be prioritized over that lot, basically? So when you have this clean-cut dichotomy that you've just described of an extreme right wing, an extreme left wing, of just very black and white views of each other, where's that middle space going to be, where you really explore what is it that you really want, and where is it that you really want, and where's that going to meter out?
I think is often called, in derogatory terms, the sheeple, the masses, the zombies, the people who are asleep or slaves. That where the people, if we aren't on message to whatever message it is, that we are the enemy, or sometimes we're worse than the enemy. This is one of the things that particularly gets me when I'm dealing with progressives from the left. They talk about ordinary people. Well, they're worse than the extreme fascists because they tolerate them, and they talk about tolerance and being tolerant as if it's bad. To my mind, when we're tolerant of each other, it's brilliant. We respect our differences. We're quite happy to eat food from other cultures. We're quite happy meeting people who are different. One of the things I love about travelling, and I've travelled through many countries, is people are, where are you from? What's it like where you come from? What do you do? Here, come and see our world. And you see them doing the same things, just in different ways. For the vast majority of us, going back to the bit about the political, about the people who shout about the world and how it is and it should be, and their supporters, and then there's the rest of us. The rest of us, we just want to get on with our lives. We've got more important things to deal with, and it's making sure there's a roof overhead, it's making sure we can pay the bills. And because of the economic mess that is consumerist capitalism, there are a huge number of us who are struggling. When we mentioned about education earlier, or that might have been a talk we had during the break, when I went to university, I was one of the last generation where we got grants. We didn't pay to study, we got paid to study. We lived in a country which had an economy that was growing. We now live in a country where the only thing that's growing is people's debt. There are some people who are very well paid, but the statistics that come out now are shocking. these are just a few which I remember. Something like 70% of people are no more than 3 missed paychecks away from being on the streets.
Yeah.
That's terrible. 5, 6, 7 out of 10 children now living in poverty or virtually in poverty. The number of parents who are missing meals to make sure that their kids get fed. When there's this pressure in society, our differences do stand out.
Well, when those pressures are in society, decisions are going to be made a certain way. Like you said, if a parent has to decide, and I know of situations where parents are choosing either a hot meal for the kids or a hot bedroom with the heating on.
Yes.
It's either put the heating on or put the oven on to cook the dinner and make food, meaning where's the money going to go? And that's sadly becoming more and more prevalent. And go ahead.
I think this is the reality of poverty. This is one of the things that bugs me a lot as a philosopher, and I follow Marx on this. I'm not a Marxist, it's a different conversation. But when we start talking about poverty here in the West, you've got a certain class of people who say, oh, you don't know what poverty is, go and live in a slum in India, or go and see what it's like living in an African village. They don't understand what poverty is here in the UK. My thoughts on poverty is, it's when you've got to make a choice between food on the table or heating.
Yeah.
And it's not just that, it's then when your shoes fall to pieces and you've got to make a choice between food on the table, heating, and buying a new pair of shoes. And then you get sick and you've got to pay for a prescription charge. And then for people who've got families, you've got Christmas coming up and you want to do something nice for the kids, because poverty is about this overwhelming debt. When we talk about this idea of slavery and the abolishment of slavery, there's a new term that we need to be talking about now, and it's debt slavery, where you've got to keep on working in order to make sure that the money's coming in so that you can pay the minimum quite often on the credit cards. And for people who just see their debt mounting, it changes the way we think. And then looking at the older generations, I call the baby boomer generation the most selfish generation, and it's a bit of a cruel joke, and I'm being cruel to them by calling them the most selfish generation. But these are people who've worked hard, damn hard, and they've bought houses and they've got themselves nice cars and they've got a life going on, and then they retire and they've got this little sum of money which is shrinking, and they have no idea how long they're going to live. They have no idea what health care they're going to need as they grow older, but most of them, they aren't stupid. They're aware that as they grow older their health is going to fail, and they've got to have the money to be able to pay for the care that is no longer being provided by the government, that's no longer being provided by the NHS. And this overwhelming sense of poverty, it's going back to what I said earlier about changing what's going on the planet. We've got to change our economic systems, because it's just something that we create. It's a collective figment of our imagination, but it's an incredibly important one. We've just got to come up with a better model for it.
But just given the idea that you're presenting and the principles of scarcity that are existing, and this idea that there's food banks opening up, and it's a depressing thought to think there's a need for food banks. Like you said, it doesn't matter how things may be in other parts of the world.
Yes.
You measure it in kind of, you measure your cloth to where you are, who you are, sort of thing. And if that's the dire situation in other places, then there's a universal idea that we need to shift our thinking in. Because if just because it's worse somewhere else doesn't make it acceptable here. But just because it's accepted here doesn't necessarily make it.
In many ways, I think it's actually worse here in the UK and in America as well than it is in many other parts of the planet. As I said, I've just come back from Thailand. Thailand's got one of the biggest disparities between the wealthy and everybody else anywhere on the planet. The wealthy there are in the billionaire category. Everybody else is in the penniless category. But in Thailand, everybody's got plenty of food on the table. Food is dirt cheap. They've all got homes. Everybody's got mobile phones, laptops, computers, access to motorbikes and cars and things like this. I'm not naive. There is some poverty in Thailand. It's not utopia. But as a nation, they are progressing, and I've been through many, many countries where this is the case. Here in the UK, there's something twisted. For me, what really got me when I came back from Thailand was the number of homeless people on the streets. I spent 3-4 months down in London when I first arrived back. It was horrific. I got a bus from central London up towards Hatfield. I was sat up on the top deck looking out the window. I counted something like 170 people sleeping on the streets. This was just on one bus journey.
So this is one bus journey for maybe about a mile, 2 miles?
Maybe about 4 or 5 miles.
4 or 5 miles.
And these, they're not just a person sat with a sleeping bag. Many of them were, but they had bags with them. There were people who had their tents set up on pallets. There were people who had constructed temporary shelters. I've been through Delhi in India. I've been through Bangalore and some of the other cities. I've seen this type of thing there, but there's a big difference between those countries and the UK, and it's our weather. Here, if you're living outside in that climate, it just destroys a person. You look in the eyes of any homeless person, look at their face, look at their skin, you can see it. The poverty in this country is really, really biting deep. The UN were investigating the government for the treatment of disabled people a few years ago.
Yes.
What's happening with universal credit, what's happening with PIP. This is actually a very personal story for me as well. I'm on universal credit. I've been turned down for PIP after being on disability living allowance for years. I mentioned earlier, a cripple. So, sorry, this is an emotional thing for me, but it's something that is really important that we talk about. The austerity in this country has really devastated the poor. The political parties, both of them, the main parties, no Labour's better than the Conservatives, but the Labour under Tony Blair, and a lot of the middle class push this thing about the poor being undeserving, about us being lazy, about us not helping ourselves. The truth of society is, it's when we work together that we function. When there's an elite that looks after itself and patronises everybody else and talks down about disabled and about these undeserving claimants, and it creates a huge mental health problem. And this is a huge issue as well in the UK, and it's deeply tied into poverty. It's tied into failing education systems, it's tied into the failing NHS, it's tied into the fact that to get as a doctor's appointment now takes 2-3 weeks, and this is across most GP surgeries. I remember a time not long ago where you could get a GP appointment today. If not today, you could get one tomorrow. And that was the norm. Occasionally it might be 3 days, and that was considered shocking. Now when you say a GP appointment in 3 weeks, everybody goes, yeah, we accept it.
It's just like you said, it's the norm. Okay, we'll just take a short break there, Andy.
Okay.
I'm going to put White Rabbit, Jefferson Airplane.
Yeah.
That should kind of kick it in, yeah? All right, we'll play that for you. Thank you for listening, ladies and gentlemen. You're listening to Nova Radio Northeast on the Community Express Show. We'll be with you in just... I meant to say Enya. Orinoco Flow. Is that right, Andy? Yeah? Yeah, cheers.
Let me say it, let me Orinoco flow. Let me reach, let me beach, the shores of Tripoli. Let me say it, let me crash upon your shore. Let me reach, let me beach, for the lonely yellow sea. hope you dig onto cotton. From the deep sea of clouds to the island of the moon. Carry me on the waves to the land I've never been. Carry me on the waves to the lands I've never seen. We can sail with the Orinoco flow. We can sail, sail away, sail away. We can steal, we can even rock and set the moon. We can sigh, say goodbye, cross the ways to Venice. We can sail, sail away, sail away. We can sail, sail away, sail away, sail away. 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 Sail away, sail away, sail away.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to Nova Radio Northeast on the Community Express Show with myself, your host, Wajid Hussain, and we've got Andy. Hello again. Yay. So, just before the break, we were chatting, we've covered a lot of ground there. We've kind of talked about, the political system as it is. We talked about kind of what the situation is with, our community here in the northeast of England. And, just want to talk to you about where you see this all going then. How's this all going to unravel?
Well, I want to talk a little bit about myself first to introduce this. I'm not a politician. I don't want to be a leader. I'm not interested in telling you or anybody how to live your lives. I'm not a preacher. I'm not looking for followers. I don't want to start or to end any religions. I'm a rational atheist. What I mean by this is, I don't think there's a God or anything like that. I think this is it, I just banged on a table. But I bow respectfully before the beliefs of every other person on this planet. What I am is I'm a philosopher. I'm one of the mad, I'm one of the bad, I'm one of the crazy, and I'm one of the dangerous to know. Not because I'm going to hurt people, but because of the ideas that I've got to share. This is why I have no intention of being a politician or a preacher. I'm a visionary, a pragmatic utilitarian visionary. When I talked about the social evolution earlier, I mentioned hipster, and I gave a little description of that. I think a hipster is anybody born after about 1967, 1970. When I talked about the people who shout about the world and how it is and how it should be, I want to talk about us, the younger generations. We've got no message of our own. We've got no movement of our own. Everything gets tied back to pretty much what came out of the counterculture revolution, or it goes back into old ideas about nationality and religion. As I said, I don't want to end any of these. I think they're important and I think they're beautiful, but I do think we need a new message for the younger generations. And this is what I call the Northumbrian way. It's 4 simple statements. These statements are: work hard, party harder, be respectful, and relax in style. And I put my personal challenge on the end of this, and because this is a radio show and I've been asked to be polite, it's grow the bleep up and don't be a bleep. What I mean with this is work hard. Whenever there's work to be do it. If you need to learn skills, learn the skills. If you've got to practice them, practice them. If you work as part of a team, work as part of a team. If you're an employer, well, do you need to provide training? Do you need to provide tools? Well, do this so people can work hard. And this is the really important part about this. Pay us. Pay the people who do the work. Because this is how we actually have a proper functioning economy. The second statement, party harder. Well, what's a party? A party is whenever a group of us, friends, family or strangers, get together and we have a good time and everybody wakes up safely. The next day, the day after, or hey, after the big parties, a week later. It doesn't matter if it's 70,000 people going into a football ground to watch 22 grown adults kick around a ball. It doesn't matter if it's 50 people going into a church to pray, or 60 adults going into a room where they take their clothes off and close the door and adult things happen. or a million of us gathering together in a field to dance to loud music. Party harder. The big parties, some of these are birthdays, they're weddings, they're funerals, they're celebrations about our lives. It's somebody's just got a job, we're going to go out and celebrate. These mark important times in our lives, but they're also the times when we get together with strangers. And some of these, they involve people who are doing work. Pay the people who put the parties on, pay the entertainers, respect the security staff, respect the rules, respect other people at parties, particularly if there's alcohol and drugs involved. But this takes us into be respectful. I mentioned this earlier. The first part, and I'll repeat, is learn to respect yourself. It's important. Learn to respect others, other people's cultures, other people's societies. I will stress this point again and again. It's not about respect me. I happen to be a white male and bisexual and a cripple. Yeah, and I'm just one of 7.6 billion of us. Whoever you are, hearing my voice, what are you? Well, if I'm respecting you for being you, and you're respecting me for being me, then we've got something really beautiful going on. If I say you must respect me because I am this, sorry, the whole thing breaks. The last one, relax in style. Do I need to describe it? Actually, I think I do. I think many people get bits of it, but not everybody gets what it really means. It means stop and smell a flower. Watch the clouds go by. If you come through Newcastle, look around, this is one of the most beautiful cities on the planet. If you in Northumbria, we know we're in one of the most beautiful parts of the world. But it actually doesn't matter where you are on the planet. You can be in a rubbish tip. If you look around, you will see beauty. If you happen to see somebody beautiful walking down the street, there's nothing wrong with admiring the view. You see somebody beautiful and you say, my God, you're beautiful. It's a compliment. It's not an insult. It's not harassment. Stand up, make a fool out of yourself because it's fun. Enjoy it. If you see somebody do that, stand back, watch, laugh. This is about how we live our lives. Work hard because it's important. This is how we create the world we live in. Party harder because this is how we really enjoy life. The be respectful gives us a basis on how we deal with each other. The relax in style, as far as I'm concerned, we only have one life. Enjoy it. The grow the bleep up and don't be a bleep. The first part of that. There's 7.6 billion of us on this planet right now. 100 years ago there was about 1.5 billion. What has changed between then and now? What did our parents and our grandparents and our great-grandparents do? The obvious one is the word bleep. That's how we're here. But there's also something else. They haven't died in great numbers. This is fantastic. Our parents, our grandparents, our uncles and aunts, our great-uncles and aunts, many of them are still alive. This is where the real population growth has come in, is that we're not dying young. This is fantastic, and it's about the healthcare. It's about having roads, it's about having safe cars, it's about refrigeration, it's about vaccination. It's about all of this. Grow up. We've got to deal with this. This creates a fantastic world that we live in. We don't have to do the work that our parents did, our grandparents did, our great-grandparents did. We've got to change our societies to adapt to this. These are things I want to talk about. I want to talk about positive messages. The second one, don't be a bleep. Well, we all have bleeps. I'm sat on mine right now. I think that's given away what the word is. Some of us use our bleeps to get bleep out of our lives, different bleep. Other people use their bleeps to put bleep into other people's lives. Don't be a bleep. Now, I want to talk a little bit about being a Northumbrian. I want to talk something about the culture that I come from. I'm a philosopher. I'm a Celtic philosopher. This is an ancient form of philosophy, and it's about storytelling. This is something I started talking about at the beginning. I'm Merlin, the old man who grows younger. I want to talk about being a Northumbrian. about being a Northumbrian man. We are one of the peoples where one of our ways of getting married was, as men, we used to kidnap our wives. Yes, we are one of the people where men used to kidnap women. That's the banner headline. But once you get beyond that, the actual story is something different. Now, in order to get to that story, I've got to say some other bits and pieces first. First of all, I want to talk about a moot point. A moot point is something which two people can't really have a conversation about. Which is the correct God? Is an obvious answer. Two people can't have a conversation about this. One of our traditions, and this goes into my idea of a new political system, is about the moot. Here in the northeast and across the British Isles, we used to have events called moots, where 100, 200,000 people would get together for 10 days, 2 weeks, and at the moot, people would talk about moot points. That's just a little bit of this. I want to talk about marriage. We had a tradition called hand fasting. You may have heard of this. It was our version of marriage, where two people or more would get together in front of their friends, family and community and say, we're hand fasted, and the community would respect this. Now this might be a man and a woman. It might be a man and a man. It might be a woman and a woman. It might be 3, 4, 5 people. Doesn't matter, or more. But these people would get up and say, we are hand fasted. We are forming an adult relationship with each other. And the rest of the community, the society, would respect this. From this comes the tradition of the honeymoon, which you've heard of, but you might not know what it means.
Where the origin of it is from, yeah?
And it comes from this part of the world, from the northeast of England. And the first one, honey, it's about honey wine, mead. This is the drink of warriors, of gods, of lovers. Well, and the second bit is a moon, 28 days, a month. When a group of people got hand fasted, they would have a honeymoon. They'd be given 28 days worth of mead, and they'd be excused all of their responsibilities in society, in the community. So they could be in love, so they could find each other and connect. And if we happened to see them running through the trees naked, we understood they were on the honeymoon. But at the end of it, they've got to come back and get on with life. But I introduced this as we were the people who used to kidnap our wives as men. Well, at the moot, if you hadn't met somebody in the community, there's 150, 200,000 people there. You're meeting for the young or the people. You form a connection. Now, we used to fight each other as families. We would steal each other's crops and bits and pieces, and this was just part of the game of life. We rarely killed each other. But you've met somebody, you've connected, you separate, you go back, you keep in touch. We can write letters. We've been writing for a long time. It was Latin that we didn't write. We wrote English. But you connect, you want to get together. Well, the story, and I'll tell the heroic version of this. The man goes up to the other family's castle, their keep, their hall, and bangs on the door. The man, the family, opens the door. What do you want? I'm here to steal your daughter. I'm going to kidnap her. Come in, they say. Sit down at the table. Here, have something to eat, have something to drink, and they're welcomed. It's not about trying to kill them or anything like that. At midnight, what would happen is the man and the woman would be given their horses and some packs of food and sent on their way. At sunrise, the families would come hunting. The tradition was that you had to run for 7, 10 days across the countryside. This is what developed into running across the border to Gretna Green later, in the history thing. And they had to run. The kidnap thing, let's be serious about this. If you go in and you bang a person over the head and you tie them up and you put them on the back of the horse and you carry them off, well, hang on a second, you're doing this to a Northumbrian woman. Up here, our tradition is we breed our women as strong as the men and our men as strong as the women. And we're strong people. We look after each other, we work together. If you're trying to carry a person who's tied up and unconscious on the back of the horse across the rolling Northumbrian countryside for 7 to 10 days with people who know the countryside as well as you, you're not going to make it, and they're not going to be happy when they catch you. The truth of it is, you're going to be running together. One of you will be asleep on the horse and the other one will be holding you on. Which one is doing the holding, which one's asleep? Well, both of you are at different times. There's going to be times when you're underneath a riverbank and they're above looking for you. You've got to stay silent and wait for them to move on. Now, they might know that you're there and they'll stop and they'll have a picnic just to see if one of you cries out for help, because they want to know if you're strong enough to form a relationship. The 7 to 10 days, in some of the ancient stories, the hunters come back and they find the couple back at the woman's household, and they've got their feet up on the table and they're talking with the people left behind and sorting out what's going on. They've got round the hunters and come back. The truth of this is, if you're marrying somebody from a family where there's bad blood between you, and there was real hatreds and there was real feuds, you've got to be very strong, not just individually, but together as a couple, to make the marriage work. You've got to be able to do this. And the truth of this is, you're actually a bridge between these two families. You're a way to end a feud. You're a way to establish communication again. This is what it is, part of it being a Northumbrian. The weather up here can kill you. Any time of the day, any time of the year. Not instantly, that doesn't happen very often, but you can go out on a beautiful summer's day and suddenly the sky changes and it's lashing down with rain and the wind is driving, and if you haven't got the means, the ability, the knowledge, the skills to look after yourself, it can and it will and it does kill people. The land is hard. For 6 months, 7 months of the year, nothing grows. We plant our harvest in the spring and we harvest it in the fall, and we've then got to make our food last through the rest of the year, where we spend our time inside doing what? We've got our drink, we've got our food, we tell each other stories. It's sunny, we've got to work, make hay when the sun shines. We get up and we work hard and we work together as a team. And when the work is done, we relax. This is my message for the future. This is what I want to spread as the hipster creed, as the Northumbrian way. This is my message. As the species, we're waiting for our next great leader to stand up and speak, our next Martin Luther King, our next Nelson Mandela, our next Mahatma Gandhi. Have you heard the voice? Do you know who I am? My name's Andy. I'm Andrew James Dinnan White. I was born in Hexham. I grew up in rural Northumberland. I went to Belsay First School. I went to Mowden Hall, which was a private school. I then went back to Ponteland County High School. I went down to Huddersfield Polytechnic. I went to Sunderland University. I've worked in IT. I might have helped, well, I did help set up the internet. I might be the person who invented the mobile phone. There's a story in that. I'm important in the cannabis debate. The medical cannabis debate, which started in America about 2001, has something to do with me. I spent 4 years when I was unable to walk on the internet. This unable to walk, I mentioned I was a cripple. I haven't told you the story of this. I want to do this just quite quickly. I spent 6 months as a baby in the RVI. I had an infection in my left hip. It was septic osteomyelitis. It was caught just before it killed me. Whether it was minutes, hours, days, it doesn't matter. The doctors and the nurses saved my life. When I was 4 years old was the first time that I started to walk. When I was 11 years old, I had my right leg stapled to stop it from growing. I was already 6 foot tall, and I was already speaking with this voice. Not the gravitas that I've got now, but the depth. When I was 16 years old, in my GCSE year, I stretched my left leg 6 centimetres. The surgeons broke my bones. They put metal pins in and a metal bar on. I was the one who turned the key that stretched my leg. My sister, who went on to become a nurse and a mother, helped me clean my wounds, as did my mum, as did my family. Because family is important, but I'm the person who did this. When I was 19, my left leg was straightened below the knee by 20 degrees. Oh, and I ripped a little toe off and it got sewn back on when I was 12 or 13. Don't run in swimming pools, it's good advice. I had a full left hip reconstruction done when I was 28. I broke my neck 3 years ago and I went dancing for a day and a half. I went back, opened up an art gallery and went to hospital 4 or 5 days later and checked myself out of the hospital because I couldn't speak to a consultant in English about what I could do. I've come in here with a broken wrist. I came off my bicycle week past Wednesday just beside Biker Job Centre. Little detail in this: when I came off my bicycle, there were some chavlasses sat outside the job centre drinking lager at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. They came running across, they helped me off the road, they got my bike off the road and they looked after me. To those ladies, if you're listening, thank you. And to everybody else who helped me recover. And you've just heard some pretty horrific stuff about me. I've also climbed trees, I've climbed buildings, I've climbed mountains in the dark to stand on them as the sun was rising and raised my voice and spoken. I fought on a battlefield with 2,500, 3,000 people. I led a charge of 400 into a force of 2,000 or something like that. It was live action role playing, like Game of Thrones, like Lord of the Rings, done for real with rubber weapons. On that battlefield I slew a demon that no mortal man could touch. I've done many, many amazing things. The most amazing things that I think I've actually done though. The biggest crowd I've ever spoken to was about 110, 120,000 people in India. Arambol in Goa at the New Year, going from 2014 into 2015. I stood on top of a hill as the sun was rising and raised my voice and spoke. I spoke beautifully about what it is to be a human being. I had friends on the beach who said they could hear me. I wasn't using a microphone, I wasn't using any speakers. I had a conversation on a beach in Italy. This was just before I broke my neck. We were talking about education in the 21st century and my ideas about that. I did maybe 50-60% of the speaking. I got off the beach, I went down to the other end, and one of my Italian friends told me what I'd just been saying, because the Italians had translated what I said into Italian and were repeating it down the beach. This is my closing bit here. I've got 3 words as a philosopher. They are all of us. I want to speak on the stage in front of you. When I finish, I want to close with these 3 words. All of us. All of us. Imagine hundreds, thousands, millions of us chanting this together after somebody on stage has spoken. Now that someone might not be me. It might be you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Andy. I appreciate your time. I'm going to play you out kind of in a fix, actually.
White Rabbit, if you can get it working.
I was going to go with either Snap or Johnny Cash. Do you fancy White Rabbit?
Snap.
Yeah?
Yeah,
I think so. Yeah, I think it's kind of a nice vibe to it. All right, I'm going to try and get this to work, Andy, because you know how technically adept I am at getting the right song this evening.
Thank you, and thank you to the audience as well for listening.
Thank you very much for being here. You've been listening to Nova Radio Northeast on the Community Express show. Hope